Let's begin. But first, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to The Broken Truth. Rose Bennett stepped into the upscale bar, the heavy bass of music vibrating through the polished floors, neon lights flickering in reds and blues across the crowded space. The chatter of laughter and clinking glasses seemed to surround her, an invisible wall of judgment she hadn't anticipated. Her hand rested protectively over her rounded belly, the weight of her pregnancy making her movements cautious and deliberate. She had hoped for a quiet evening, a rare moment to enjoy herself before the demands of motherhood consumed every waking hour. Yet from the moment she crossed the threshold, she felt the curious stares, the subtle sneers, and the palpable tension as if everyone knew she didn't belong in this world of flashing lights, expensive cocktails, and careless bravado. No sooner had she taken a careful step toward the bar than Megan Foster, a striking woman in her late 20s with a sharp smile and sharper eyes, began whispering to her companion Scott Reynolds. Their laughter started quietly, but it quickly grew, the sound slicing through the music like a knife. Rose caught snippets of cruel words, comments about her appearance, her growing belly, the way she carried herself. Each word pierced her heart, but she held her head high, trying to maintain some shred of dignity amidst the crowd that now seemed to watch her every move. The situation escalated when Scott, in a drunken haze, shoved past her carelessly. Rose stumbled slightly, and her gown snagged on a protruding edge of a decorative railing. The fabric tore with a sharp rip, and her face flushed immediately, not from the exertion but from the sudden exposure and the realization that everyone around her had witnessed it. The laughter that erupted was cruel and unrelenting. Phones were raised, flashlights illuminating her in the most humiliating way, recording her shame for an unknown audience. Rose instinctively brought her hands up, shielding her belly and the torn gown, attempting to cover herself from both the physical exposure and the emotional assault. She looked around desperately for someone to intervene. The bartender, Paul Edwards, caught her eye but hesitated, glancing nervously at Megan and Scott before returning to polishing glasses, pretending nothing had happened. Other patrons shifted in their seats uncomfortably, yet no one dared to speak up, the silence amplifying her humiliation. Rose felt her chest tighten, a mix of panic, sorrow, and disbelief. How could a place so vibrant, so full of life, have become a stage for her degradation? Her hands trembled, gripping the fabric as she tried to steady herself, but the mocking voices only grew louder, the crowd's attention now fully focused on her misery. Tears pricked her eyes as she took a shuddering breath, her body tensing under the weight of shock and humiliation. Every instinct screamed to run, to escape the flashing neon lights, the laughter, the phones, and the judgmental stares. Yet, she could not move, frozen by the overwhelming realization that she was utterly alone in this crowd, entirely at the mercy of those who found amusement in her pain. The music, once rhythmic and welcoming, now throbbed like a cruel drum, each beat echoing her shame. Rose Bennett's heart raced, pounding in time with the laughter and chatter, and she could feel the tear-streaked warmth on her cheeks as the full force of public humiliation engulfed her. Rose Bennett had always been a woman who valued simplicity over extravagance. She grew up in a modest household where every accomplishment was earned through hard work and determination, where money was measured not in luxuries but in lessons learned and values instilled. Even as she married Thomas Bennett, a man whose wealth and status could command attention anywhere he went, Rose maintained the same humility that had shaped her childhood. She chose to keep her marriage relatively private, avoiding the spotlight that came naturally to the elite. She wore simple clothes, shied away from ostentatious events, and preferred quiet dinners over gala parties, not out of fear, but out of respect for who she was at her core. The pregnancy had made her even more cautious, adding layers of vulnerability to a woman who was already careful about where and how she appeared in public. The contrast between her quiet life and the world of luxury she now occasionally inhabited was always stark, and she was painfully aware of it. While Thomas's success allowed him to move through the world of high society effortlessly, Rose navigated it cautiously, her presence understated, her accomplishments private, and her gestures modest. Even now, standing in the crowded bar, she felt the divide as though it were tangible, a line between her world and the one the patrons around her belonged to. She had come alone because she wanted a chance to relax, to have a normal evening without the added attention her husband's name could bring, but the choice now felt like a mistake. Her mind wandered to memories of Thomas promising her protection, not just from physical harm, but from the cruelties and judgments of the world. "I will always have your back," he had said, his voice steady and certain, his eyes locking with hers in unwavering reassurance. Those promises had filled her with courage in the past, a quiet strength that reminded her she was never truly alone, Yet tonight that strength seemed distant, overshadowed by the cruel whispers and mocking laughter that surrounded her. She had hoped to rely on her instincts, to navigate the night with caution and composure, but every joke and sneer chipped away at the confidence Thomas had instilled in her. Rose's decision to attend the bar alone was fueled by a mix of personal pride and a desire for independence. She wanted to prove to herself that she could exist in these spaces without fear, that she could handle the subtle pressures of attention and scrutiny with grace. But now, as her gown was torn and the crowd's eyes fixed on her humiliation, she realized the vulnerability of her situation. The combination of pregnancy, isolation, and the unexpected cruelty of strangers made her painfully aware of her fragility. Every glance, every whisper, every cruel laugh reinforced the idea that tonight, she was on display not for admiration, but for ridicule, and that in this environment her simple life, modest upbringing, and quiet dignity had made her a target. The cruel laughter from Megan Foster echoed across the bar, sharp and deliberate, cutting through the music like a jagged blade. "Look at her," Megan sneered, tilting her head and letting her gaze sweep over Rose Bennett's swollen belly. "Does she even know how to carry herself? Or is that extra padding just for show?" Her words, though casual in tone, were soaked in malice, designed to humiliate, to draw every eye in the room to Rose. Scott Reynolds, standing close by, didn't need encouragement. He quickly chimed in, his voice dripping with mockery. "Honestly, I don't even know why she's here. She clearly doesn't belong in a place like this. What's a simple girl like her even doing among us?" His laughter mingled with Megan's, creating a chorus of ridicule that bounced off the neon walls and ricocheted in Rose's head. Before Rose could even gather her thoughts, a careless hand, Scott's, brushed past her with an exaggerated stumble, sending the contents of a drink toppling. Warm liquid splashed across her gown and dripped down her arms, leaving a dark stain on the already torn fabric. Gasps from the crowd mixed with snickers, and a few raised their phones to capture the moment, recording her distress as if it were entertainment. Rose froze for a second, stunned by the sudden invasion of her personal space and the deliberate cruelty, then instinctively pressed her hands over her belly, shielding her unborn child from both the physical wetness and the emotional assault. She glanced around, searching for the staff for anyone to intervene, but Paul Edwards, the bar manager, pretended not to notice. He kept his back turned, polishing glasses with nervous urgency, refusing to acknowledge the drama unfolding just a few feet away. Other patrons shifted uneasily in their seats, whispering to one another but not daring to speak up. The silence, in its own way, felt heavier than the laughter. It was tacit approval, a collective consent that this spectacle of humiliation could continue unchallenged. Rose took a shaky step toward the exit, hoping to escape the scene before the mocking grew worse. But Megan and Scott, sensing her vulnerability, blocked her path with calculated movements, their bodies forming an almost theatrical barrier. Every attempt she made to move forward was met with a subtle nudge or a lingering glance that reminded her she was trapped, forced to endure the public ridicule. Her torn gown, now clinging unevenly to her body, became a visible symbol of her degradation, a focal point for the audience that had gathered around. Laughter and whispers amplified every movement she made, turning a simple act of walking into a spectacle of embarrassment. The music, which had once been a lively backdrop for social enjoyment, now felt oppressive, each beat thudding like a drum on her chest, synchronized with the mockery surrounding her. The vibrant lights, flashing red and blue, contrasted cruelly with the tension tightening her shoulders and stomach. Inside, her mind spun with panic, fear and helplessness, every mocking word from Megan and Scott amplified by the neon glare and the indifference of the crowd. The bar, once just a place for leisure, had transformed into a stage of torment where Rose Bennett's dignity seemed irrelevant, and the loud, pulsing music mirrored the chaos building within her, a perfect counterpoint to the unraveling of her composure. Rose stumbled toward the far corner of the bar, her hands trembling as she clutched the sides of her torn gown, trying to shield herself from the harsh gazes that followed her every movement. The neon lights flickered across her pale face, painting sharp contrasts of red and blue that seemed to exaggerate every emotion she felt. Her chest heaved with rapid breaths, a mixture of fear, shock and humiliation coursing through her body. Each heartbeat reminded her of the life growing within her, and a sharp pang in her lower abdomen sent a jolt of panic through her entire being. The possibility of early labor loomed in her mind, turning her distress into a physical ache that she could not ignore. She sank to the floor as the laughter of Megan and Scott continued in the distance, feeling the cold hard tiles beneath her legs. Her hands instinctively moved to cradle her belly, whispering softly to the tiny life inside her. "It's okay, my love, we'll get through this," she murmured, her voice trembling with emotion. The sound of her own words was both comforting and heartbreaking, a fragile attempt to create a bubble of safety amid the chaos of ridicule surrounding her. Every whispered promise to her unborn child was a reminder of the responsibility she carried, and of the vulnerability that made this public humiliation cut so deeply. Memories of her wedding day flooded her mind, her husband Thomas standing before her with steady eyes, pledging to protect and cherish her through every hardship. She remembered the warmth of his voice, the certainty in his promises, and the quiet confidence that had made her believe she was never truly alone. Those recollections now clashed violently with the present, leaving her shaken, her faith in protection and safety momentarily stripped away. Shame and anger intertwined in a confusing knot, her tears tracing lines down her cheeks as she recalled the mocking words and laughter that had so publicly targeted her. The cold, bright lights of the bar seemed unforgiving, harshly exposing her every tremor, every sob, and every subtle movement that revealed her inner collapse. She pressed her palms to her face, sobbing quietly as her body convulsed with the weight of emotional exhaustion. Each inhale felt like a struggle against the humiliation that pinned her to the floor, and each exhale was a futile attempt to release the tension building within her. Her mind raced with fear, self-doubt, and sorrow, a storm of emotion that made her feel utterly powerless. In that corner, surrounded by music, laughter, and indifference, Rose Bennett broke completely, her public collapse a testament to the cruelty of those around her and the fragility imposed by her pregnancy. Rose's trembling fingers fumbled with her phone as she pressed Thomas Bennett's number, her voice already tight with panic even before he answered. Every ring felt like an eternity, each vibration in her hand echoing through her chest, magnifying the tension and fear that had been building since the first cruel laugh. When Thomas finally picked up, his deep, steady voice filled her ear, calm and precise, but it only heightened the contrast with her own shaking tone. "Thomas, it's happening, they're making fun of me, the dress, my belly," she stammered, tears spilling freely as she tried to explain the relentless humiliation at the bar. Her words were fractured, punctuated by sobs, but she forced herself to continue, desperate to communicate every detail. On the other end, Thomas remained silent for a long moment, listening intently, his composed breathing the only sound she could hear over the phone. There was no panic, no rash reaction, only the quiet, deliberate patience of a man who assessed every situation before making his move. Rose's mind struggled to reconcile the image of her husband's calm voice with the chaos surrounding her, the flashing neon lights, the mocking laughter, and the invasive cameras. Her fear collided with awe as she realized that Thomas's silence was not uncertainty, it was calculation. I don't know what to do," she whispered, her voice cracking, the tears running freely down her cheeks. Thomas's response was chilling in its calmness. "Stay where you are. Do not move," he instructed firmly, his words like a command that cut through the panic clouding her mind. "Trust me. I know exactly what needs to happen." There was no need to explain, no attempt to comfort her with empty reassurances. His confidence, bordering on quiet menace, was enough to steady her shaking hands and racing heart. She could feel the weight of his control extending across the miles, a protective force she could cling to even while physically trapped. As she nodded, almost instinctively, Thomas's tone shifted subtly, a low, almost imperceptible edge of controlled fury creeping into his voice. He did not yell, he did not demand. His anger was refined, precise, a weapon sharpened over years of business and experience. Rose understood immediately that this was not a man who would allow injustice to continue unchallenged, and that Megan, Scott, and anyone else mocking her would soon understand the consequences of their cruelty. Her fear began to mingle with a flicker of hope, a realization that her husband's presence, even if unseen, was already changing the dynamic entirely. For the first time since she had entered the bar, Rose felt a shift within herself. The terror that had held her frozen began to loosen slightly as she clutched her belly, whispering to her unborn child. "He's coming, everything will be okay." The confidence and quiet power emanating from Thomas's words grounded her, giving her the strength to endure the last moments before he would arrive and confront the humiliation head-on. In that moment, the storm of fear and despair began to meet the calm, calculated force of her husband's unwavering authority. The bar doors swung open abruptly, and a hush fell over the room as if the air itself had been charged with sudden electricity. Every conversation paused mid-sentence, every laugh cut short, and the pounding beat of the music seemed to diminish, leaving an almost surreal silence in its place. Thomas Bennett stepped inside, his presence magnetic and undeniable. His tailored suit clung perfectly to his athletic frame, the dark fabric contrasting sharply with the neon lights that still flickered across the walls. Every eye in the room instinctively turned toward him, and the effect was immediate. The chaotic energy of the bar shifted, replaced by tension and awe. Megan Foster and Scott Reynolds froze mid-laugh, their previous confidence evaporating as they recognized him. The casual arrogance they had displayed toward Rose moments ago faltered under his gaze. Thomas's eyes were calm but commanding, taking in the room, assessing the situation with the precision of a man accustomed to controlling outcomes. He moved with deliberate steps, each one measured, his posture straight and unyielding, exuding a silent authority that made even the rowdiest patrons shrink back. Staff members behind the bar ceased their hurried movements, glasses still in hand, unsure whether to continue their work or bow to the unexpected force that had entered their establishment. Without hesitation, Thomas walked directly toward Rose. His eyes softened only for her, but there was no rush, no unnecessary theatrics. Reaching her, he bent slightly and draped his coat over her shoulders, shielding her from both the cold and the lingering humiliation. The gesture was protective, precise, and utterly respectful. Rose felt a rush of warmth as the fabric covered her, the sudden security of her husband's presence a stark contrast to the vulnerability she had endured moments earlier. Her tears had not yet dried, but his calm aura began to ground her, offering a lifeline in the midst of the storm of mockery. Thomas's gaze briefly flicked to Megan and Scott, whose faces were pale and incredulous. He did not speak yet, words were unnecessary. The sheer authority emanating from him communicated more than anything he could have said. Then, lowering his eyes to Rose, he gently cupped her face, his hand warm and steady, and asked quietly, "Are you hurt? Are you okay?" His voice was calm but firm, resonating with care and controlled power. Rose shook her head slightly, her voice catching in her throat as she murmured, I'm fine." Even as he reassured her, Thomas's controlled fury simmered beneath the surface, palpable enough to make the bullies shrink further. His silent command filled the space. This humiliation would not stand, this injustice would be answered. Every patron, every staff member, every person in the room felt the shift. The bar that had moments ago been a stage for ridicule was now under the quiet, undeniable authority of Thomas Bennett. For Rose, the relief was immediate. She felt protected, visible, and valued, wrapped not just in the coat he had placed over her shoulders, but in the unspoken promise that no one would ever dare demean her again while he was present. Thomas Bennett's gaze swept across the bar, steady and unyielding, as he took in every detail of the humiliation Rose had just endured. He did not shout, he did not demand immediate explanations. His calm presence carried an authority that made the room shrink in its awareness. "Tell me exactly what happened here," he said quietly, his voice low but commanding, each word precise, measured, leaving no room for evasion. The bar's patrons shifted uncomfortably under his scrutiny, their earlier amusement replaced by a growing sense of unease. Megan Foster and Scott Reynolds exchanged nervous glances, attempting weak, forced laughter, as if pretending everything was a joke could erase the moment entirely. Their smiles were strained, faltering under the weight of Thomas's steady, piercing gaze. Thomas's eyes never left the pair as he continued, "I want all security footage of this room from the past hour. Every angle. Now." The command was simple, but the authority behind it was impossible to ignore. Paul Edwards, the bar manager, swallowed hard, fumbling with his tablet and nervously nodding. "Of course, sir. I'll get it right away," he stammered, panic threading through his voice. The earlier bravado of ignoring the incident was gone, replaced by the stark realization that Thomas Bennett's presence changed everything. Staff who had hesitated moments ago now moved quickly, clearly aware that the stakes had just been raised to a level far beyond their comprehension. Megan and Scott's laughter faltered entirely, replaced by shifting discomfort and half-hearted apologies that sounded more like reflexive panic than genuine remorse. Thomas did not raise his voice, he did not berate them with theatrics. He simply stepped closer, the calm in his demeanor now bordering on dangerous precision. "Do you really think this is acceptable behavior?" he asked quietly, his words cutting sharper than any shout. Megan opened her mouth, searching for a response, but none came. Scott shifted uncomfortably, trying to laugh, but his voice caught in his throat. The authority in Thomas's calm, unwavering posture rendered them powerless, their prior confidence dissolved into visible fear. Then, in a deliberate, unhurried tone, Thomas revealed his identity to the entire bar. "For those of you who don't know, I am Thomas Bennett. My wife, Rose, is under my protection. And anyone who deliberately targets her will answer for it. The weight of the words landed like a hammer, reverberating across the room. Shock replaced the earlier amusement. Whispers spread through the crowd as the significance of his statement sank in. This was no ordinary man confronting bullies. This was a billionaire, a man whose power and influence could make consequences immediate and irreversible. Before Megan or Scott could react, Thomas spoke again, his tone calm but absolute. Legal actions will be taken. Apologies are insufficient. This behavior will not be ignored. The finality of his words left no room for argument, no escape from accountability. At that moment, the sound of approaching footsteps became audible as Officer Liam Brooks arrived, his presence further legitimizing the enforcement of law and order. The combined weight of Thomas Bennett's authority and the arrival of law enforcement made it clear. The humiliation that Rose had endured would not stand unchallenged, and justice, measured and exacting, was about to be served. Megan Foster's face was pale, her confident smirk from earlier completely erased as she stumbled over words, trying desperately to form apologies that felt hollow even as they escaped her lips. Scott Reynolds fidgeted beside her, his arrogance replaced by visible panic, stammering as he muttered repeated, "I'm sorry," unable to meet Rose's eyes. Their previous laughter and cruelty had crumbled under the weight of Thomas Bennett's calm authority and the presence of Officer Liam Brooks, and now they realized the full consequences of their actions. Every sneer, every shove, every cruel comment had placed them in a position where their pride could no longer shield them, replaced entirely by shame and regret. The bar itself was not spared from scrutiny. Thomas's insistence on accountability extended beyond the bullies. Legal action was initiated, and an investigation into the management's negligence began immediately. Paul Edwards, the bar manager who had stood frozen in inaction earlier, now realized the seriousness of the situation. His failure to intervene had contributed to Rose's public humiliation, and he was informed clearly that the consequences would affect him personally and professionally. The social humiliation that once belonged solely to Rose's tormentors now touched the establishment itself, sending a message that arrogance and neglect in public spaces would not go unanswered. Thomas, however, did not resort to threats or violence. His approach was calculated, precise, and above all, lawful. He allowed the system to address the wrongdoing, letting the weight of authority, legal oversight, and social accountability serve as instruments of justice. Rose, wrapped in his protective coat, watched silently from nearby, processing the whirlwind of events. Her mind still grappled with the shock and emotional toll of the night, but seeing Thomas handle the situation with such measured control helped her slowly regain a sense of security. Medical assistance was immediately arranged, a precaution Thomas insisted upon to ensure Rose and her unborn child were unharmed. A nurse arrived promptly to check her vitals, her movements professional and reassuring, confirming that no physical harm had been done despite the trauma. Rose allowed herself a small sigh of relief as she felt her body relax slightly, knowing she was finally out of danger and in the care of both her husband and medical professionals. She remained quiet, absorbing the lesson that justice could be served without vengeance, that protection and dignity could coexist, and that her own strength had carried her through the most humiliating night of her life. Morning sunlight filtered gently through the blinds of the quiet hospital room, casting warm, golden stripes across the pristine white walls. The chaos and humiliation of the previous night felt distant, almost unreal, as Rose Bennett rested against the soft pillows, her hand instinctively resting on her rounded belly. The rhythmic heartbeat of her unborn child, now strong and steady under the attentive care of the nurses, brought a deep, soothing sense of relief. Each thump was a reminder that life and hope had survived the storm, that despite the public humiliation and fear, she and her baby were safe. Thomas Bennett stood beside her bed, his hand enveloping hers in a firm, reassuring grip. His eyes, usually commanding and intense, were softened by concern and genuine remorse. "I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of sincerity. "You should never have had to face that alone. I promise it won't happen again." His apology was not just words, it was a recognition of her suffering, an acknowledgement of the emotional burden she had endured, and a pledge to protect her moving forward. Rose looked up at him, her own eyes wet with quiet tears, but this time they were a mixture of relief, gratitude, and the rekindling of trust. As she settled back, taking a deep, steadying breath, Rose felt a resurgence of confidence and self-worth. The shame that had been forced upon her by Megan, Scott, and the inattentive bar staff no longer had power over her. She realized that her dignity had never truly been lost, it had merely been challenged in a cruel public display. The support, strength, and unwavering presence of Thomas had amplified her inner fortitude, showing her that true power often lies in silence, patience, and calculated action rather than immediate confrontation or retaliation. She reflected on the events of the night, on the vulnerability she had felt and the fear that had threatened to overwhelm her. Yet in the quiet aftermath she recognized a profound lesson. The strength of a quiet woman should never be underestimated, especially when bolstered by love, protection, and unwavering loyalty. Power does not always roar. Sometimes it walks calmly into a room, changes the course of events, and restores balance without spectacle. Looking down at her baby, gently moving beneath her hand, Rose understood that dignity, courage, and resilience were inseparable from the love that surrounded her. The moral of her ordeal crystallized in her mind with clarity: never underestimate a quiet woman, or the profound force of the love that protects her. In that serene hospital room, with morning light spilling in and her child safe, Rose Bennett felt whole again, empowered not by vengeance, but by the quiet, steadfast strength that had carried her through every moment of fear, humiliation, and despair. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to The Broken Truth.